Hey guys, this is a quick demo on how to loop through lists in Python. So to start off, I've created two lists, one with names and another with grades. And you can imagine that this is a classroom or you're a teacher and you're trying to make a grade book for your class. So the simplest way to loop through items in a list is to use a for loop. So here I have a very condensed way of writing where I have for and then a variable name and then the name of the list. So what this is saying is for each name in the list names, we're going to print name. So let me comment out the rest of the code so we can just see what this block does. And here we printed out every name in the list names. This variable name here, names or name, it can be anything you want. I chose name because that is what's in the list, but we could have just as easily done something like X, and as long as you are calling the same variable within your loop, it should run the exact same. So that's one way to do it. So let's look at another example using the grade list this time. So the grade list contains integers, and we can add integers. And something maybe this teacher would want to know is what the class average is. So to calculate an average, we're going to need a sum, and we're going to need to know how many things are in the list. So I'm going to set up my for loop the same way I did before, but this time it's looping through the list grades. So I called my variable in the loop grade because we're going through each grade in the list of grades. Again, this part, you can name it anything you want as long as you're consistent. It is good to use descriptive names, but just understand that this is a variable that is changing. Every time the list runs, the variable grade will take on a different value. So when I run this, we're going to get class average equals 90.5. But let's kind of examine what's happening more closely. So I'm going to kind of same thing that I did in the earlier list. I'm going to print every time we run through the list. So you can observe that the first time the loop runs, the value of grade that's being printed is 89 because that's the first entry in the list. Then it's 90, then it's 80, then 97, then 86. So it's taking on the values of the entries as it's running through, and that way you can print everything in the list. So once we run through the entire list and we add them all together, I just have the average calculated where we divide by the count, which I was also keeping track of through the loop because the loop is running the same amount of times as elements in the list. So there are 4 grades in the list. The loop runs 4 times. The counter is 4, and that's how we can calculate this average of 90.5 for the class. So now I'm going to show you a different approach that allows us to use some other applications. So I'm going to try to go through both lists now to create a grade book. So one way to do this is to look at how many items are in the list. Since the names and grades list go together because you're not going to have a grade without a person or a person without a grade, they are meant to have the same amount of entries in them. And we can count that there are 4 people in this class. So I'm going to go back to what we're used to here and use the range function. So for I in range 4 because there are 4 students in the class, we're going to print their name and their grade. And some of you might prefer this form while starting out because it's a lot easier to see what's happening here because you're used to using the range function and you understand how that works. And here we have explicitly written that we are printing whatever name is at index I and then whatever grade is at index I. So when I run this, here's our grade book. It has each student matched with their name because here we made sure we were consistent. In position 0, we have Abby. In position 2, we have Bob, and so on. Another way we can do this, like let's say the class is huge, like maybe it's over 100 people, or maybe we don't even know how many people are in this class. A much faster way to do this, rather than having to sit and count how many entries are in the list, is we can just grab the length of the list. And there's a built-in function in Python for this called length, len, and I'm going to take the length of names. And if I clear my console and rerun this, we get the same result. And because grades and names were created to go along with each other, they are equal in length. So if I took the length of grades instead and I run this, we'll get the same answer. So these are just a few different approaches, or a few different applications of looping through lists with a couple different approaches. This approach we did at the end, we can also do when we're just simply going through one list. For example, for I in range 4, let's print the grades at index I. And if we run that, right after the class roster, we printed each of the grade entries. So that's just a couple ways to do it. You can pick whatever you're comfortable with, and hopefully as you progress and do more projects and code more, both ways will make sense to you. And as you can see, there are different applications, but this is just a quick overview on how to loop through lists.